Hi there, this is Solitaire Ronin from Solitaire Ronin Films, and welcome to the alphabet of my favourite films, and the letter L. You might have to strap yourselves in for this one. Again, these are my favourites that I will be producing a shortlist to one magical day, do a top 150 favourite films list. But this is a way of staving off the inevitable. So I'm going to show you a pile of films beginning with letter L. Again, please let me know your favourite films beginning with the letter L. I always look forward to seeing your lists, because inevitably there'll be films I haven't seen and films I've completely forgotten about beginning with the letter L. So let's make a start. I'm not going to talk too much detail about them because this one might drag on a little while. So first of all, it's an Orson Welles, and it's The Lady from Shanghai. This is the Powerhouse Indicator release, and I would highly recommend picking it up because there's lots of lovely extras. This is from 1947. The myth is Orson Welles pretty much said to studio, yeah, I'll make a film, and apparently he just picked up a paperback and said it's called The Lady from Shanghai, never having read it or had any idea what it was about. He then got his ex-wife Rita Hayworth, who was obviously famous for having lovely long red hair, and she then cut it to make her an ice cold blonde, and it's a very strange, odd little part noir, part travelogue. Orson Welles has an Irish accent. For a noir, most of it's actually shot in daylight, and of course it has the amazing Hall of Mirrors sequence at the end. It's another dark, twisty little Orson Welles film. As usual, the shot composition is just stunning. Welles' use of the frame and characters within the frame is just astounding as always. And again, even although it was messed with the studio, there's still a fascinating, intriguing little mystery wrapped up in an enigma. Next on the list is the first Lady Snowblood film. This is the 2 film set by Haru, but I would just recommend the first one. Quentin Tarantino was highly inspired by the Lady Snowblood films for Kill Bill, so much so that he ripped off quite a lot of the scenes from it, but in an inspirational way. It's got great music, it looks wonderful, it has kind of that odd 60s Japanese weirdness, it has some wonderful set pieces. It's got a really strong heroine, and her thirst for revenge is just wonderful. The sequel's not bad too, but this one's just the first Lady Snowblood. It's an absolute blast. Next on the list is Last Year in Marienbad, which is one of my favourite films of all time. It is the classic film of there's a thin line between art and arse. This film encapsulates everything that people who are dubious about art house cinema, and when they hear art house cinema, you know, they kind of worry about pretentiousness and whatever. This film is full of that if you're looking for it, but it's also one of the greatest edited films you'll ever see. Again, characters will be in a room and they'll just turn their head and they'll be in another room. The editing's stunning. The shot composition by Alain Resnais is fantastic. It's a strange story of a man and a woman and another man, and the stranger says to the woman, "You agreed to leave your husband last year in Marienbad, and it's a year and the year is up, so I've come to get you to leave your husband." She denies all knowledge of it. It's a very strange film. People act strangely. You can read it as a kind of science fiction film. You can read it as in they're all actually dead. You can read it as a satire of the bourgeoisie, the middle classes, who just go to these big country houses and just talk very banal conversations and just mill about with no real purpose. With the exception of a little bit annoying score. It's only about 90 minutes. Yeah, 93 minutes, so it doesn't outstay its welcome. You kind of get into the rhythm of it. You almost get into a zen state with it if you just go with it. It's a beautiful film, but I suppose if you're not in the right mood for it, it can give you a bit of a headache. It's just an amazing film. I mean, the first time I saw it, which was late night in BBC Two, as most of my favourite films, my introduction to them kind of was, it just blew me away, and it continues to blow me away on Blu-ray, but it's perfectly understandable if people just absolutely hate it. I kind of like films sometimes that you either absolutely love or hate. Next on the list, it's Michael Mann's Last of the Mohicans. Not based on the book, which Michael Mann absolutely hated for being rather racist. This is Michael Mann not in the urban setting, which we're usually used to seeing. Bizarrely, I saw this twice in the cinema when I used to go to the cinema. And also saw Heat twice in the cinema when I used to go to the cinema. This is just a great Sunday afternoon historical actioner. It's got a great score. It looks stunning, as you'd expect from Michael Mann. His commentary on it is wonderful, as he kind of goes into the historical detail, because, as you know, Michael Mann, he likes to get everything as kind of correct as possible as far as the dress and how people talk and the relationship between different people. He wants to kind of make it as accurate as possible. It's certainly not his greatest work, but for a short list, it has to be on here. That's Last of the Mohicans. Next on the list is Late Spring by Ozu. This is Criterion, obviously. I'll admit I am relatively new to Ozu. I've only seen Late Spring and Tokyo Story. I have a pile of his films in my backlog under the BFI section. I think I actually prefer Late Spring to Tokyo Story. Again, it's just a beautiful little story, deceptively simple. Because I'm doing a Saijit Ray season, I do kind of see a lot of Ozu's influence on Saijit Ray. Yeah, it's a really nice little film, and I do need to watch more Ozu. So that's Late Spring. Next on the list is a wonderful little noir called Laura, starring Gene Tierney, Dana Andrews and Vincent Price. But the kind of show stolen by Clifton Webb as the columnist. The dialogue is just absolutely wonderful. It's about Dana Andrews being obsessed with a dead woman, as you would, because it is 40s and it's noir. The dialogue is just fantastic. It's dialogue and a film that they certainly don't make anymore. It's just absolutely fantastic. And Eureka have done a really nice job with that release as well. Next on the list, it's one of the films in this Ealing Studios Blu-ray box set, and it's not the Lady Killers, it's the Lavender Hill Mob, about a bunch of crooks who decide to involved with gold, and they decide to import it in little miniature Eiffel Towers. Eiffel Towers, yes, that's a completely different film. Eiffel Towers, even. I've never actually seen an Eiffel Tower. Never mind. Yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of the Lady Killers. I much prefer Kind Hearts and Coronets, Lavender Hill Mob and The Man in the White Suit. The Lavender Hill Mob, sorry, Alec Guinness, it's just a treat. Again, it's another lovely Sunday afternoon film that you can enjoy with all the family, and it's quite wonderful. Next on the list, yes, it's only available on DVD, it's Lawn Dogs. Why this isn't available on Blu-ray, I don't really know, because it's fantastic. Even though the subject matter probably wouldn't get made now, it's pretty much about this gated community and this little girl who befriends the kind of working class Sam Rockwell who comes to mow their lawns, and they kind of start a friendship that obviously her parents and the families don't really approve of, because he's looked down upon, you know, as being poor. He lives out in the woods in a trailer. There's never... It's funny because there's another film in this list that's kind of similar in tone, as far as an adult male being friends with a young girl, but it never really gets creepy or unpleasant. It's handled really nicely, it's funny, but it's dark, and it's also a satire on gated communities and middle class America, and it really needs to get a Blu-ray release. Next on the list, it's Lawns of Arabia. Again, the second half might not be as good as the first half, but for pure spectacle, it's a film that certainly wouldn't be made now, and if it was, I'm actually surprised Spielberg hasn't remade it and just done it all with CGI. Peter O'Toole is luminous as Lawrence, who there's a darkness about him. So again, depending on your sensibilities, you'll enjoy Lawrence of Arabia for different reasons. If you like films with spectacle, if you like war films, or if you like films with lead characters that are somewhat tortured and having underlying things going on amidst the big spectacle. It's got a great score by Maurice Jarre. It's obviously famous. It's full of famous shots. It still stands up 57 years later. It's stunning. Next on the list is a modern film. I know it's ridiculous. It's actually quite a recent film. I know it's shocking. It's Leave No Trace, about a father played by Ben Foster and his daughter played by Thomasin Harcourt Mackenzie, who are kind of off the grid and kind of live in the woods, but then society being what it is, they can't kind of let them just live in the woods, and they're brought into this community, but they don't really want to stay in that community. It's a really nice character study of isolation and people who do fall through the cracks of society, and society's need to have people conform instead of people just doing what they want to do. It's actually a really nice little film, and it's modern. Oh. Next on the list is one of my favourite films of all time, which I see quite often. It's The Legend of 1900. I did a random review of this a long time ago. It's Giuseppe Tornatore's finest film. I know Cinema Paradiso got him the Oscar, and Cinema Paradiso is very good, but for me Legend of 1900 is a masterpiece at every level. This is the extended version, which I would highly recommend getting. It's one of those great myths. It's about a boy who grew up on a cruise liner, and he just plays piano on the cruise liner as he gets older. It's told in flashback. It stars Tim Roth. It's one of those films that shouldn't really work, but it works on every level. It's one of Ennio Morricone's finest scores, and that's saying something, because it's Ennio Morricone. Beg, borrow and steal, and try and watch this. If you go with it, you'll just fall in love with it. It's truly beautiful. It's just a stunning film, and I now want to go and watch it. Legend of 1900. It's fantastic. Next is another film with a slightly uneasy relationship between a grown man and a young girl. It's Luc Besson's hugely enjoyable Leone, with a wonderfully subtle performance by Gary Oldman. Leone, played by Jean Reno, is a hitman who saves Natalie Portman, very young Natalie Portman, character Matilda, and she wants him to show her the tricks of his trade. It does have one of the greatest lines in cinema history, when Matilda asks Leone, is life always this hard, or is it just when you're a kid? And Jean Reno just goes, always like this. It's no truer statement has ever been made. Next on the list is Let the Right One In, the original. The American remake, Let Me In, I believe it was called, could be wrong, was actually not bad. But this one, with the exception of the scene with the cats, which is done with really bad CGI, which takes you right out of the scene, which is a shame because the rest of the film is kind of understated creepiness. Again, about two young children who form a relationship. One is a bullied boy and the other one's a vampire. Next on the list is one of my favourite films of all time. It's The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp by the mighty Michael Powell and the mighty Emmerich Pressburger. What to say about this film? The first time I saw it, I believe, wasn't late night in BBC Two. It was an afternoon in BBC Two. And it just blew me away. There's just so much genius in it. It's so good. Churchill wanted to ban it. It questioned the whole British attitude of, war as, equating it to a game, and having to play by the rules. And then, of course, the Nazis came along and just obliterated those rules. But somehow, some of the British military were still thinking of it as a game of cricket or whatever and playing by rules. It almost, flashes forward to Richard Lester's How I Won the War and the fact that Michael Crawford's mission is to go build a cricket pitch behind enemy lines. It's just that attitude. Roger Livesey gives a wonderful performance as Blimp. Anton Walbrook is just sensational as his German friend throughout the years. Walbrook's speech at the immigration place in London is just one of the greatest scenes in cinema history. Deborah Kerr is just fantastic as three important women in Blimp's life. I'm actually getting goosebumps even just thinking about it. It's just, when you consider when the Archers were making these films, it was during the war, post-war, when everybody was making these kind of drab kitchen sink dramas. That's a broad generalisation, of course. They were just making films that were out of the stratosphere, and again, they were not appreciated at the time. But do yourself a favour, if you've never seen Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, it's available in Criterion. This is a really nice edition. It's just a stunning piece of work on every level, technically, emotionally, from a colour standpoint, from a sound standpoint, the acting. It's just simply one of the greatest films ever made. Next on the list is The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou by Wes Anderson. It's essentially Wes Anderson's take on Jacques Cousteau. Bill Murray stars with a quite impressive cast of pals as he tries to find his nemesis, the jaguar shark that killed his working partner. It's a really fun film, but bizarrely, the thing that really took me, apart from Willem Dafoe's performance, which is fantastic, it's one of Willem Dafoe's best performances, but bizarrely the end titles I found quite moving. I don't know whether it was just me or whether I was just in a strange mood, but the end titles are really quite moving, just the way it's done. Yeah, lots of fun. Next on the list is Monty Python's Life of Brian. Don't think I really need to say too much about Life of Brian. It's always a toss-up whether it's better than The Holy Grail. It's just full of classic moments, classic scenes. I mean, what did the Romans ever do for us? It's just fantastic. Next is another Life of, but slightly different. It's The Life of Haru by Mizoguchi. This and Sancho the Bailiff are just flat masterpieces. Both are available in Criterion. Spine 664 if anybody's watching or keeping count. It's another one of Mizoguchi's great stories about women and how they're treated in feudal Japan. The ending of the film is just devastating. Yeah, it's a beautiful film and also a horrible film in the best sense of the word. Next on the list is one that I missed out on the letter E. It's Louis Malle's Elevator to the Gallows, but the reason it's in the letter L is for years I thought it was called Lift to the Scaffold, but it's apparently Elevator to the Gallows. But for years I always called it Lift to the Scaffold. That's just me. Louis Malle's debut, it's just fantastic. Jean Moreau and Maurice Ronet as lovers who get caught up in a slight case of murder. It's got a wonderful soundtrack by Miles Davis. It's really twisty and perverse at how it ends and how the story goes. It's just a beautiful film. It's one of those films that, you know, if I was making a list of films that are quintessentially French, whatever that means, and you can take it whatever that means to you, but to me, Elevator to the Gallows / Lift to the Scaffold is just one of those quintessentially French films. Paris by Night, it's just... Next on the list, I'll try not to spend too much time in my soapbox, it's John Sayles' Limbaugh. Strangely enough, not on Blu-ray. This is one of John Sayles' finest films, even though the ending upset quite a lot of people. But the clues in the title, it's another beautiful character study, this time of a community in Alaska. So the first part of the film, we get the community, all these characters beautifully created and woven together, and then it kind of focuses on David Strathairn and Mary Elizabeth Mastronio, which I've mispronounced. I always put an extra Onio, and her daughter as they go on a day trip to the wilderness. And certain things happen and the film takes quite a big left turn. It also stars Chris Christopherson in his second appearance in a John Sayles film. We'll get to his first one in a bit. It's just a assured film. Sayles wrote, directed and edited it. Another great score by Mason Daring. Great performances. Dave Strathairn and Mary Elizabeth are fantastic. It's John Sayles. Please go watch it. It was good to see, thanks to Isaac Dunn for letting me know that John Sayles actually did a Closet Picks video on YouTube for the Criterion collection. So hopefully that puts Criterion in the mood to do more of his films on Criterion. Next on the list, you probably knew it was coming, it's The Lobster by Yorgos Lanthimos. This is a French steelbook. As you may or may not know, I pretty much think Lanthimos might be the best director in the world currently. And The Lobster, I think, is in the running for the best film in the last 20 years. I just absolutely love it. The first time I saw it, I just was so impressed by it. It is quite a bizarre concept. If you're single, you go to this hotel and you have to couple up with somebody, and if you don't, after 40 days, 42 days, I could be wrong, you're turned into the animal of your choice. Obviously, Colin Farrell chooses a lobster because they live for hundreds of years and they've got blue blood, so they're royalty. Rachel Weisz is wonderful in it, John C. Reilly. It's just odd. If you're used to Lanthimos, it's just wonderful. It's hilarious. It's darkly funny. Again, it's another satire on society and this importance of you must be in a relationship because that's the most important thing. If you don't like Lanthimos, you'll probably go, what was that? But he is building quite an impressive body of work, with Killing with Sacred Deer, which strangely enough was in the letter K, and The Favourite, which was in the letter F. He's certainly, for me, one of those directors I'm fascinated to see what he does next. That's The Lobster by Lanthimos, which also starts with the letter L. Next on the list is Local Hero. Again, I did a random review quite recently on it. One of Bill Forsyth's finest works. So glad that eventually it got released on Blu-ray, and Criterion. There's also a Region B UK release of it as well. It's just absolutely beautiful, about a stranger in a strange land, a small Scottish town. An American from the oil company comes over to try and buy out the whole town. It's just a little gem. It's aged really well. It will put a smile on your face and it will put you in a good mood, which not all films do. Next on the list is The Lodger. Again, this is another real favourite. Again, I bought these films because Hangover Square, which was in the letter H, they're both with George Sanders, so I'd bought them for George Sanders. And then you discover Laird Krieger, which again I did a video on some time ago. Such a great actor, sadly died well before his time. He only made a few films, but this is just the best Jack the Ripper film. I know Alfred Hitchcock did a silent one in 1929 called The Lodger, but this one is just fantastic. Laird Krieger's doing stuff as far as acting style that was ahead of the game. It's just fantastic, and I urge you to buy it and watch it. You won't be disappointed. If you are, let me know and I'll give you a refund. Next on the list, it's another John Sayles film. And it's another John Sayles film that isn't available on Blu-ray. It's Lone Star. It's even on one of those old Click DVD cases. This is the John Sayles film that got nominated for an Oscar. As he said, for two reasons. One, it's set in Texas and there's lots of people in Texas and they like to see films about themselves. And two, there's a gun in it and Americans like guns. This was actually a film that I saw in the cinema when I used to go to the cinema. Set in the Tex-Mex border. It's about generations. It's about how the past still affects the present and the future, how we're all connected. So again, Sayles shows you this community, all these characters that are beautifully fleshed out. They're three-dimensional. It goes between generations, so you've got Chris Cooper in the present day. You've got his father, who's played by Matthew McConaughey in flashbacks, and his partner Chris Christopherson. And again, the way Sayles, who wrote, directed and edited it, just shifts from time. So you'll just pan across the floor after one scene and you'll go from the past to the present because it's all just seamless and it all just fits in. Joe Morton is fantastic because the army colonel who takes over the local army base. It's just a beautiful film. Frances McDormand even turns up and does a wonderful cameo. It's just one of Sale's masterpieces. It's one of the best American films in the 90s. And it's not available on Blu-ray, even though it was Oscar nominated. It's a stunning piece of work. It's one of Sale's masterpieces, like I say. It's just wonderful. Another eclectic score and soundtrack with Mason Daring. And hopefully coming to Criterion one day. Next on the list is a bit of a cheat, because it's the whole saga of Lone Wolf and Cub. This is the wonderful Criterion release of Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Carter, The River Styx, which I think is probably my favourite one. Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart to Hades. Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart in Peril. Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart in the Land of Demons. And Lone Wolf and Cub, White Heaven and Hell. If you enjoy Chambara films, if you enjoy Zydeki, if you enjoy just ridiculous swordplay, but with a very human heart, it's a story about a man and his son as they bond by making a path of blood across Japan. It's just wonderful. It's a great set by Criterion, and it's an essential pickup. Look at that artwork. Next on the list is a great wee modern western. Well, it's not modern. It was modern at the time. It's Man. No, it's not. What am I talking about? It's Lonely Are the Brave. Sorry, I completely blanked. It's Einsam sind die Tapferen in German. It's a German media book, Blu-ray. It's Lonely Are the Brave, and it stars Kirk Douglas, who is still a cowboy even though it's the 50s. He cuts through barbed wire fences. He still rides a horse, and he comes up against Walter Matthau, who is almost playing the same kind of sarcastic cop as he does in The Taking of Pelham 123. It's just a beautiful little film about the end of an era, how the world has changed, and a man who just can't accept it. It's pretty bleak. There's no shiny happy ending, but it is a great wee film. Kirk Douglas gives one of his best performances. Gina Rollins is fantastic. It's just a great wee film, and again, it's one of those films that I hadn't heard of at the time, but in the 20 years since I've seen it, it's just a great wee film. That's Lonely Are the Brave, now that I've finally remembered what that's called. Next is another one of the greatest British films of all time, The Long Good Friday, Bob Hoskins, and Helen Mirren. Bob Hoskins' finest performance as Harold Shand, an East End London gangster who has dreams of making it big and pretty much ruling the whole of London, but things go awry and he has a really bad bank holiday. It's full of classic scenes, classic dialogue. It's just fantastic. And it has one of the greatest endings of all time, and one of the greatest ending acting performances of all time. Again, it's brutal. It's certainly bleak. You do you root for Bob Hoskins, even although he's really not a nice man. He does terrible things, but for some reason, because it's Bob Hoskins, you still kind of see his humanity and you still root for him and you're actually on his side, which is a clever trick to do. Next on the list is a bit different. It's Joshua Oppenheimer's The Look of Silence. This is a film that was made before The Act of Killing, which again for me is arguably the best film in the last 25 years. So this one is about a man whose father was killed during the Indonesian genocide, and under the guise of being an optician, he interviews some of the men responsible for the genocide. It's perhaps not as jaw-dropping as The Act of Killing, but it's still uncomfortable viewing. There's moments where they kind of get threatened and kind of told they could be made to disappear. It's another just chilling film. I mean, the credits are pretty much all anonymous because they just feared they literally would disappear. It's not as jaw-droppingly stunning as The Act of Killing, but as a companion piece to The Act of Killing, it still packs a rather terrifying punch. And we're getting there. We are honest. It will end, unlike the war on drugs. Next on the list is Lost Highway by David Lynch. Now, this is a film with two halves. I pretty much know that this probably not going to be in my top 150 of all time. But it was just really to point out the first 45 minutes of this film is arguably the best 40 minutes of David Lynch's career. The atmosphere he creates, the use of opening up the frame but then having nothing coming out of the frame. As an audience, we are trained that when the frame opens up next to a character, something is usually going to happen in that space. But Lynch plays on that. Again, the sound design is really quite disturbing. And again, opening up of the frame, but nothing actually being in it apart from darkness, is really creepy and off-putting. The second half of the film has its moments. You could argue there's moments where he also reaches a little bit of self-parody. But, excuse me, the first 40-45 minutes are amongst his best work. Next on the list is one of my favourite Billy Wilder films of all time, one of my favourite films of all time. It's The Lost Weekend, starring Ray Milland as an alcoholic writer. This is a lovely Eureka Steelbook. It's a really fantastic film. Again, Ray Milland plays the character. You like him. You root for him, even though he lets people around him down, even though he does terrible things. It's just beautifully written, beautifully acted. It's not particularly preachy. It's just essentially showing one man and his addiction, and it's just a fantastic film, The Lost Weekend. And finally, Woody Allen's Love and Death. This for me is his funniest early film. A kind of taking the mickey out of Tolstoy and War and Peace. The sight gags, wonderful one-liners, and if you're a Woody Allen fan, it's one of his essential films. And if you're not a Woody Allen fan, you're not going to watch it. So thanks very much for watching on that bombshell. Thanks very much for watching the letter L. Thank you if you stayed with me to the end of the video. I know it's a bit of a slog. Again, please let me know in the comments below your list of favourite films beginning with the letter L. I cannot wait to read them. And hopefully we'll see you again for the letter M, which, having not really thought about it, I think the letter M might have a few films in it. So once again, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you again. This is Ultra Ronan saying farewell.